How to Care Less About What Others Think, a science-backed guide to inner freedom. Let's start with something honest. Most of us don't actually care what everyone thinks. We care about a very specific group of people. People whose approval feels tied to our safety, belonging, or worth. And that matters, because caring what others think isn't a personal weakness. It's a biological and psychological pattern. Humans are wired for social survival. For most of human history, being rejected from the group meant danger. So the brain learned to monitor social feedback very closely. Modern neuroscience shows that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain. That's why criticism can feel so intense, even when nothing is actually at risk. So if you've ever told yourself, I shouldn't care so much, and then felt frustrated that you still do, there's nothing wrong with you. Your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. But here's the key distinction. Caring occasionally about feedback is adaptive. Living your life through the imagined opinions of others is not, and that's where we begin reclaiming inner freedom. One of the most important concepts to understand is something psychologists call the spotlight effect. Research consistently shows that we dramatically overestimate how much others notice us. Our mistakes, our words, our appearance, our performance. In reality, most people are far more focused on themselves. Your brain, however, tells a different story. It assumes you're under constant evaluation. Why? Because the brain fills in uncertainty with threat. And when you don't know what someone thinks, your mind often defaults to the worst-case interpretation. This is where caring what others think becomes mentally exhausting. Not because of reality, but because of the stories we tell ourselves. Another critical factor is self-concept clarity. Studies show that people with a stable sense of who they are, values, priorities, internal standards, are far less reactive to external opinions. When you don't have a clear internal reference point, your nervous system looks outward for cues. What do they think? Did I say the right thing? Was that okay? So the goal is not to become indifferent or detached. The goal is to shift from external validation to internal alignment. That shift changes everything. Let's talk about perfectionism for a moment. Perfectionism is often misunderstood as high standards, but psychologically, it's rooted in fear of negative evaluation. Research shows that socially prescribed perfectionism, the belief that others expect you to be flawless, is strongly linked to anxiety, burnout, and depression. In other words, when your self-worth depends on being approved of, you are constantly performing, and performance is not the same as presence. Caring less about what others think doesn't mean lowering your standards. It means separating your worth from your performance. Now let's bring in emotional regulation. When someone's opinion triggers anxiety, the nervous system goes into threat mode. Heart rate increases, thinking narrows, you replay conversations, you second guess yourself. Evidence from emotion regulation research shows that naming the emotion, simply identifying it, reduces its intensity. So instead of asking, why do I care so much? You might say, I'm feeling anxious because my brain is interpreting this as social threat. That small reframe restores agency. You're no longer inside the emotion, you're observing it. Another powerful evidence-based concept is locus of control. People with an internal locus of control believe their actions and choices influence outcomes. People with an external locus of control feel controlled by others' reactions, moods, or judgments. When you care excessively about what others think, your locus of control shifts outward. Your peace becomes dependent on approval. Your confidence depends on reassurance. Your decisions depend on anticipated reactions. Inner freedom begins when you consciously bring control back inward. You start asking different questions. Instead of, what will they think? You ask, what do I think about this? Does this align with my values? Would I respect this choice even if no one applauded it? Research on values-based living shows that people who act in alignment with their values experience greater psychological well-being, even when outcomes are uncertain or uncomfortable. That's because values provide stability. Opinions fluctuate, values anchor. Now let's address something especially relevant for high-achieving women. Social conditioning plays a significant role here. Women are often rewarded for being agreeable, accommodating, and likable. Over time, this can train the nervous system to associate approval with safety. So, caring what others think isn't just personal, it's cultural. Letting go of that conditioning doesn't happen overnight. It happens through repeated small acts of self trust. Speaking when it would be easier to stay quiet, saying no without over explaining, allowing someone to misunderstand you and not rushing to correct it. From a psychological standpoint, this is exposure. You're teaching your nervous system that discomfort does not equal danger, and over time, your tolerance grows. Here's the most important truth: you will never reach a point where no one has an opinion about you, and that's not the goal. The goal is to reach a point where those opinions no longer decide your life, where feedback becomes information, not a verdict, where disapproval feels uncomfortable but not destabilizing, where your sense of self remains intact even when others don't agree. That is inner freedom, not apathy, not indifference, but grounded self trust. Caring less about what others think is not about hardening yourself. It's about softening your dependence on external validation and choosing again and again to live from the inside out. That is not only psychologically healthier, it is profoundly freeing. Grab my free leadership workbook, 5 Steps to Communicate with Calm, Clarity, and Confidence at powerofpeacefulness.com.